Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of V Next. I am your host, Mike Walker, and in this episode, we are talking with Jonathan Reichental, again, the best selling author of Smart Cities for Dummies. And we had such a great conversation last time talking about his book and all the key concepts that we just wanted to go deeper. And in this episode, we're going to do just that. We're going to actually dive into the key emerging technologies that are going to fuel these smart cities. And so it's definitely worth a listen. We're going to talk about not only some of the key examples of cities doing really great things, but also some practical advice for you, whether or not you're in a city job or not. It's going to be interesting for you because a lot of people are actually going to migrate to urban centers, and we interact with these urban centers in many different ways. So you'll definitely want to take a listen to this. Now, as always, all the links and show notes will be on vnextpod.com. Again, that's vnextpod.com. All right, guys, let's get into it. Jonathan, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Well, thanks. I must have done okay if you're asking me back. So great to see you.
Yeah, I know. We had such a great conversation last time, and we teed up so much in that short amount of time. And I want us to come back today and really dive deeper into some of these aspects that we talked about. We're not going to be able to cover everything because you wrote the book on it, and there's a lot to
Yeah,
it. How many pages of the book? Like 300 and some odd pages, right?
almost close to 400 pages
400 pages.
of pure insights. Yes.
Yeah, so, obviously we're not going to be able to cover all that, but what I wanted to cover today is just kind of chip away at this and talk about more of the emerging tech side because,
Hmm.
more than ever, we are being impacted by all these disruptions, whether it be economic, social unrest, a global pandemic.
Hmm.
Lots of things are happening right now. And on top of it, we've been going through this massive digital transformation as well. And so, who better to talk to who is diving deep into this is you, Jonathan. And so, I guess the first thing I'd like us to talk about is, in your mind, what are the key disruptions, whether it be business or social or technical? But what are these key disruptions that are driving some of these emerging technology decisions today, in your mind?
Yeah, some of it comes from just the increasing complexity of growing cities. We talked about last time that most people now live in cities, and about anywhere from 1 to 3 million new people are moving into cities every week. So we're building these increasingly complex, sophisticated environments. We have a lot of old infrastructure. We have to build a lot of new infrastructure, and it's all happening while we're operating those cities. There are new regulations, there's new behavior, and there's new expectations. People want to interact with their government similarly to how they expect to in the consumer space. Um, and so all of this change, and I could throw in others there. I would be remiss if I didn't say the climate crisis as well.
Right.
All of these things are motivations for great change, and so cities realize that we can't solve 21st century problems with 20th century ideas, and so it's not when we talk about smarter and more sustainable communities, people immediately think of technology. That's a big piece of it, but it's also about thinking differently, approaching problems differently, reinventing the delivery of service and how. And that revolution's about greater velocity of change. It's about greater scope and impact. It's about the convergence of technologies and ideas. And as you write about yourself and in your upcoming book, it's about digital transformation. The moving from an analog world to a digital world. So no lacking in the drivers of why we need very positive change and we have to fix things. Now the question is, how do we do that? What do we apply? What do we bring to bear to address these challenges?
Right. And I was actually surprised to learn that over the next couple years, we're just a few years away, that, the World Economic Forum is predicting that 60% of the world's population will be in urban centers. And can you
Yeah.
believe that? I mean, that's a crazy amount of people. And you look at these other trends, like you alluded to, which, is like the aging population. So, over the next decade, we're going to find that people over the age of 60 will be the largest cohort of people on the planet. And
Hmm.
so, with the, rising economic prosperity, better healthcare, we've got now companies like Toyota or Honda building elderly care robots in Japan, because Japan by 2040 will have a good percentage of their actually overwhelming amount of their population over the age of 60. And so, what does that do to a city when that's the case? And then you layer in some of these other disruptions, like a global pandemic, on top of it. It makes it very complex. So,
Hmm.
since we're talking about emerging tech today, in your mind, what are the top 5 or 10 emerging technologies that, city innovation leaders really need to think about?
Some of it is the bar is quite low, and some of it then is the big thinking. So let me kind of work through this answer based on that, right?
Yep.
The sort of the to use a cliche, the low hanging fruit is digitalization. You know, if we're going to provide services, and remember, think about many of the interactions we have with government, whether it's requesting a permit, paying a parking ticket, or finding your birth certificate, whatever the activity is that you do, you're probably filling out a form, maybe in duplicate. You're probably talking to multiple people. Um, there are millions and millions of those services across the world. There are thousands in each city. Even in the smallest city, there's a lot of those. They are typically they take a while, so they're not great in terms of efficiency. They are expensive. Interacting with a person is significantly more costly than a digital transaction. The accuracy isn't great, and you can't do things like easily check the status. So the argument to move a lot and as many as we can of those analog services to digital services is very compelling, and it's where a lot of activity is right now. You look at Dubai, and they have this mission to become a paperless government by,
Mm.
I think they're targeting 2022. They've worked out, the reduction in inefficiencies is worth many billions of dollars back to them by doing this digitalization. But that's the case. The numbers are great in lots of cities in terms of faster, more accurate. But the truth is that our citizens, our community, you and I, because we are cities, and city leaders want those experiences to be better. So there's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity there for the next few decades to digitize government. So governments need to be looking at platforms for doing that, looking for whether something should be delivered on an app or a watch. What makes sense. Lots of communities, San Francisco to London to Moscow, have a very large variety of apps that they offer to their community members for doing all sorts of things, from reporting crime to even like a full library. You don't have to. And by the way, that's really great in the time of a pandemic to have a library, a fully stocked library on a phone, as opposed to walking or going to a library.
Right.
Doesn't replicate the scenario, but it certainly gives people lots of options. So digitalization is, to me, one of the sort of low entry points. Every government needs to be underway with this, investing more in it. It's complicated at the beginning, and obviously it costs money. There's effort, but the long-term benefits are pretty incredible. Now we get a little bit more sophisticated. I would say the Internet of Things is another set of technologies that is beginning to be very compelling in a city context. Now, the Internet of Things is just basically a network of connected devices, right? So some of us know the IoT by the thermostat in our house
Right.
or our sound system, right? That we can control our speakers from an app. But we also have IoT on the industrial scale. In fact, it's called industrial IoT, and we have IoT at the urban scale and different sectors and different contexts. And I think the city as a platform is the ultimate place for IoT. And there's few reasons I believe that. Number one is there are lots of needs. I mean, it starts with a need, right? The
Right.
motivation. We want to be able to put these devices around a community to do things like detect the quality of air, perhaps, or to report on, for security, report on crime. We may want to put them in place to count vehicles at intersections. Now, counting cars and counting vehicles sounds very boring,
Right.
but it's really important when it comes to cities and how they operate. And here in the U.S. we've clearly a problem with gun shootings, and some of these sensors can help with the investigation later because they can detect the source and direction and speed of gunshots. Um, so why does the city make this positive for this environment? Because we have one of the reasons is we have lights on our streets, and light poles and lights are, first of all, there's fixed um, infrastructure, and they have power usually going to them, and they're elevated. So if you think about needing to position a sensor or sensors around a city, you've got existing infrastructure you can connect them to. There's other things we can connect it to, telecommunications, and also traffic signals. Less common, but it's there too. Um, and so you're seeing, different applications of IoT. If you look at Barcelona, for example, has their trash cans that are around the city are internet connected devices,
Hmm.
and they have uniquely they have both the IoT technology to connect those trash cans to the internet, but also artificial intelligence, which clearly is another emerging tech in a city context. So now, so why do we need to connect trash cans to the internet with AI, right? Well, because think about trash cans that are analog, right? That they're very inefficient. Many communities, the trash is spilling over. It hasn't been collected. Or maybe during a quiet day, the trash cans are low, but we pick up the trash anyway. How do we optimize? How do we make sure that we're picking up trash, making it nice and clean, and optimizing the routes for the collectors and their time? We do that with IoT technology and with AI.
And so with IoT technology, what it seems like to me, and tell me where I'm off the reservation here,
Yeah.
but it's seems to me like a foundational technology that it's allowing us to have eyes and ears and our sensory mechanisms for our digital strategy. And if we apply it to the lights, that means we can turn the lights on and off based on the amount
Hmm.
of light hitting the surface. Or you'd mentioned the example with gun violence, and there you're capturing the sound. But really, where it gets powerful is when you combine it with other technologies. You'd mentioned AI. Tel Aviv, as an example, is using IoT and blockchain to actually power their city lighting infrastructure. There's been a number of case studies. That's just one of them, but where they're able to say, yeah, this is an asset. This is the status of that asset. Here's the maintenance cycles on that. And like you said, what it's doing is it's saving them money, right? And,
Hmm.
we're not creating these digital strategies just because we want to be cool and have gadgets in our cities, but, like the trash can example, it's a good one because we see that also in the commercial sector. The Disney World, they do the
Hmm.
same thing. And how they're doing it is probably very similar to the example that you gave. Is essentially they're saying, "Hey, I could have a worker check every garbage can every half hour to see if it's full, or I could know when
Hmm.
it's full and I can optimize when that person goes there. And maybe I'll add a trash compactor as well and make it even more efficient." And so
Hmm.
I think your point is really well founded here, because we're seeing not only in cities but also in the private sector as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, excellent examples, and I think what you're talking about there again is this sort of fourth industrial revolution concept of convergence. It's, individually technologies are valuable, but bring them together and you can uniquely solve problems. I was thinking about with something called MaaS, mobility as a service,
Right.
right? MaaS. And today, mass is getting quite popular around the world, but it emerges, I believe, out of Helsinki in Finland. And the idea here is in an urban environment, you have many ways to get from A to Z, right? You clearly can jump in a car, and your own car, and drive somewhere, but you can also cycle to a train station, get a train to another location, and then get an Uber to that last mile if you want, or if that is the only way you can get there. And what we found was, and what Helsinki found originally was that could be, we want people to do and use less, carbon intensive transportation. So basically drive less.
Right.
Cycling and light rail and railway in general is better. And so people don't do it because it's complicated and it's expensive because you're paying or trying to figure out each of those segments. And what we see in mobility as a service is a way to make that more seamless for the user. So I say, I don't have a car. We'll just make that assumption, or I don't want to use my car, but I want to go to this place. How can I get there efficiently? And it says, well, you know what? Again, you can walk to the train station. On the other side, you can actually take one of those, an e-bike,
Hmm.
and go your last part of the journey. Um, but what the app will do, or the solution, is make sure that you pay once, and the payment is then distributed to all the different mechanisms of transport that you participate in. So for you as the user, it's made seamless, and society and the environment benefits. And for that to work, think of the convergence, right? You've got to have digitalization, you've got to have apps, you've got to have cloud computing to, for all this information to be stored and processed. Um, you have to have the Internet of Things because, the availability of bikes, when the next train's coming, there's lots of information you need about different moving devices. And there's AI in there too, of course, because you want to optimize that trip. So Helsinki really was the very much at the forward of that. Now you see it beginning to be experimented here in the U.S., in various cities and across Europe and Australia. So to me, that that goes to your point, real brief, that none of this is novelty. I mean, this is actually to make things better, and to really kind of, for me to overemphasize, it's about the quality of living. It's about
Right.
quality of life, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. We should never do a technology because it's cool or fun. We got to do it because it has real utility to people.
So far we've talked about the one key immersion technology area is digitalization overall, and the massive shift there. We've talked about IoT as a key enabling technology to give us the eyes and ears and the smell, etc., of our environment, to
Yes.
be able to understand that. We've touched on artificial intelligence. What are some other technologies that are on the top of your list that you're like, look, guys, this has got to be on your watch list, or you
Yeah.
may be missing the boat.
So taking it sort of like to sort of the hardware, if you like,
Mhm.
we often talk about solutions in terms of software, at least in Silicon Valley we do.
Right.
But we have to remember that in the city, it's about bits and atoms, right? It's the
Mhm.
intersection of bits and atoms. So without a doubt, based on what I'm observing, my research, my science that I've looked at here, the vehicles are going to drive themselves. We're going to have a lot of autonomous vehicles in our environment. And so on one level, you've got, just cars that'll drive themselves. use on-demand service, and a self-driving vehicle will pick you up and take you to your destination, and it'll be part of a MaaS, mobility as a service
Right.
infrastructure as well. But what I think is interesting, if we push that a little bit, is the arrival of drones,
Mm,
and I'm talking about terrestrial drones, those that are on the street, and then those that are in the air.
right.
One of the things we've seen as a result of COVID, and this hasn't lost on anybody, is whilst we were moving to kind of a delivery culture where we ordered our meals in, we ordered our packages, it was impacting retail in a big way, brick and mortar retail. Um, the pandemic has accelerated that. And now, you've got everybody home all over the world ordering for the first time online and having things delivered. So delivery is exploding, and that means there's an impact clearly on how you deliver. So you're seeing more trucks, more cars, more vehicles, um, more desire to bring the cost of that down by the delivery companies. So you're seeing the experimentation use of terrestrial delivery services, and some very, very early experimentation with package delivery with the flying drones.
Right.
But that is certainly coming. Um, from the city's perspective, well, I think we know the benefit to the user, right? I've used the grocery service a lot these last 6 months,
Right.
and to have your groceries, delivered to the front of your door, it's incredible. I mean, that so much technology works to enable that, and um, so I think we know the benefits of delivery. But for the city, there are big challenges, right? It starts off with just delivery congestion.
Right.
Right now, you have much more FedEx, UPS, and other trucks. Cities need to be thinking about how do we enable in our design of streets more entry points to delivery, like that we have curb drop off, and we have in New York City when a couple of trucks deliver on some of those narrow streets, it's a problem because you've double parked trucks, and now you can't get by. It creates more congestion. So we have to be designing cities now with that in mind. In terms of the autonomous terrestrial um, drones and flying drones, we're going to have a heck of a lot of new regulation that manages that. Things like the noise,
Right.
things like privacy. Um, and so, you're seeing some experimentation. The city of Redwood City in California was one of the first American cities to be experimenting with the delivery drones. It was a very successful experiment, but they had to go back and make some modifications, and they're continuing to push that. You see some of that experimentation with the ground-based delivery drones in London as well. And as we use more of it and we exercise it, we'll figure out the what needs to be done to improve it.
Now, Jonathan, I got to ask you though,
Yeah,
with the autonomous flying things, I'm going to go out on a limb,
sure.
and people might yell at me. You might yell at me for this, but you know, when I think about the autonomous vehicle challenge, and when you say autonomous vehicle, what I think you mean is the level 4 and 5 self driving
Hmm.
status, where I could be asleep in the back seat type of
Yep.
deal.
Yeah.
Um, I think my personal opinion is we're going to see flying consumer vehicles in more of a level 5 oriented mode before we'll see them on the ground in a level 5 oriented mode, because in the air, like you alluded to, we can control that airspace. It is a controllable situation,
Hmm.
and there isn't existing
Hmm.
prior silly laws in place. But on land, there is a lot of human interaction. There is this mixed mode, if you will, this hybrid mode of manual and this autonomy. And I personally believe that we're actually probably going to see the flying vehicles be much more successful at the level 5 initially until we get a large groundswell or there's infrastructure changes where you have dedicated roads or lanes for the autonomous vehicles. I don't know. That's just kind of how my crazy mind's working around this. But what do you think about, the whole flying vehicle thing? Mercedes has got one, Kitty Hawk's got one, Tesla's talking about it. What are you thinking?
Yeah, Uber has their Uber Air, and
Right.
Boeing, and there's the Chinese transportation passenger drone system. I just forgot the name of it, but never mind.
And
Um,
Dubai's got it in production right now.
they do to a limited degree. You
Yeah.
can take it from the airport to downtown. Um, uh, your thesis is right in that it is certainly easier to have autonomy in that environment. You don't have the incredible diversity of challenges you have in a city infrastructure. The only trade-off is, and the argument is, it is expensive, and it won't be for everybody.
Right.
I'm not sure. I think of that industrial planet in Star Wars where everybody's flying around, and it's just completely the whole planet is industrialized. I don't see that imminent. you
Right.
know,
Yeah. No, I
um,
agree with that.
there's a cost issue, of just making that applicable, but certainly the application can be more rapidly deployed. And in fact, as people who can afford it, and as it does become more popular, experience it, I think they will be safer in one that's operated by a computer.
Oh yeah, totally.
Other technologies that I can share with you, and you can tell me which ones are interesting to go a little deeper on, is energy. We
Mm.
shouldn't lose sight of, in the sort of top list of the biggest challenges that our cities face and things we have to deal with is, as our cities grow, we buy more TVs and refrigerators, and we have more big screens in our downtown areas. All you have to do is go to Southeast Asia or many up and coming cities in the Middle East, and you'll see these vast screens that have everything from advertising to news to other stuff, and it all takes power. And so the question is, how are we going to provide clean, abundant energy ongoing, right? So we're in the middle of a sustainable energy revolution, and it's actually quite a good story a lot of the time. Um, but there are other things, like not only do we have to figure out what the right mix is between carbon and non-carbon energy, with hopefully an emphasis on the non-carbon, but we have to be also better at efficiently deploying it. And for that, you see now the emergence of something, basically something called smart grids. And it's just a fancy way of saying a better version of the electrical grid that we have today. And it's using the ability to communicate between the power company and the consumer of that power. So let's just use a simple example of the power company in your home, right? In a sort of an analog energy world, you might have you have a meter that reads the power, but you're not getting a lot of information, about what thing in the house, um, whether it's a hair dryer or a washing machine. What is it that's using it? How long do you use it for? And then you're not getting information from the power company about when will be the best time to use it. They might say, because they want, nice, flat sort of distribution across 24 hours. It's the best way to be efficient. They might say, in fact, if you run the dishwasher at 12 at midnight in your neighborhood, that's when you'll get the lowest cost energy. So having communication between the electrical company and the home is very, very, very valuable. And you're starting to see smart grid being deployed in many cities, and in San Francisco, here in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, where I used to work for a while, and then across Europe and Asia, starting to see this technology. One complementary component of that is this notion of mini grids or microgrids.
Mm.
And what a microgrid is is almost a small version of the electrical system that is able to spin up when the larger system either has fluctuations or is unavailable. Um,
So is
we
it like a
see these.
backup type of system, or?
It is a backup is a nice way to say it. It can be used for optimizing power too, so it's not just for backup. It can be used when it's more efficient. You do see it like in industrial estates and in business parks, in factory settings, but we're starting to see that now in communities too, where we need a high degree of reliability.
Right.
That would be in a very lit up, power intensive, central area of a city. So I think the energy one is very exciting, and you see it being a bit of a game changer around the world. You can't just overnight, put solar everywhere, and have people understand the analytics around it and all that. It's going to take decades for the infrastructure to be put in place, the
Right.
associated hardware and software. I think finally, and this is probably one of the more uh, maybe speculative of the technologies in a city context, is blockchain. And probably a lot of folks who know me knew eventually I would go there. Um, and I say it's speculative because we're in the early days. Again, as you know, I teach this and I've written and made videos about it. To me, it's very compelling. It's fascinating tech for in a whole range of contexts.
Right.
Fundamentally, it comes from cryptocurrency. It's about making transactions, having more trust in transactions, decentralizing how computing works. So it's actually becomes quite valuable in a government context. Government of all the sort of societies, entities, collects and stores a lot of information. Plus, it conducts a lot of transactions.
Right.
And so that is sort of in many ways, the ideal scenario for a government or city is high volume of transactions, high degree of integrity, and you also want a lot of security in there. And so you have many cities using it to experiment with things like, storing personnel data and community data, voting records, identity management. In particular, in the country of Georgia, not the state of Georgia, um, a few years ago they rolled out a property registry
Right.
For the country that was now runs entirely on blockchain technology. So there's a very high degree and lots of efficiencies in how you can identify or look up property information, which is very, very important for a society. In the small city of Zug in Switzerland, and one of the reasons why this comes up a lot is because it just so happens to be a sort of center of blockchain innovation. The mayor there has been very active in trying to put services onto blockchain, including experimenting with voting. Because again, if you're looking for a system that has high integrity, high trust, reliable, and decentralized, voting is one of the areas that would be interesting. Estonia, the country of Estonia, very much a early adopter in looking at blockchain technology. And one of the ways they're playing with it right now is to expand their residency program. Technically, you can become a resident of Estonia, but it's got some conditions around it.
Right.
And anyone can. So, you can, I can, anyone watching this video can. And so that's a system that needs, again, high integrity, high efficiency, and blockchain technology seems to be the way that they're pursuing this particular path. So I could see blockchain in the years ahead, going mainstream and being used for a lot of things. In many ways, it could be invisible to most of us. It'll just be a back office technology. Recently, with turmoil in the markets, the whole idea of maybe legitimizing cryptocurrency, as a true participant in the economy, has that debate has become much more serious. So cities would become sort of a center of commerce, use of cryptocurrency potentially, which again is driven and supported by blockchain.
Yeah, and when it comes to blockchain, this is a popular topic that comes up on this podcast as well. So again, people probably are not all that surprised, but um, and what people may hear me talk about quite a bit is just kind of the separation of the crypto space and
Right.
all these other use cases. So I look at this as you've got blockchain as an underlying platform technology, and it just so happens crypto is one implementation on top of that
That's right.
platform technology. Just like when we talked about land registries or voting, or e-citizen ID. There's so many applications of this, but at the end of the day, in my mind, it's about mastering data. It's about having a way to algorithmically encrypt things in a secure and trustworthy way. The architecture is built with transparency in mind. And transparency is like truth. It's in the eye of the beholder because you control who gets that transparency and who doesn't. It was
Sure.
just like I had a conversation with the CTO of Tel Aviv, and we were talking about his permissioned blockchain, which is essentially they put a walled garden around who has access to that meter data, to those lights in the city. And I was talking to him about security, and are you worried about this, etc. He's like, no, I'm not worried about it because it's a permissioned blockchain. It's not open to everybody. I control who gets into this walled garden, and if they do
Hmm.
things bad, I'll just go put them in jail. This is straightforward. So what's nice about blockchain is natively in the technology, it allows us to have a level of transparency where it's, hey, you could go and do bad things, but just keep in mind, we can all see that you've done bad things. It's fully audited, it's immutable, you can't change it, and we can see that you've done it. And so when you look at that, for these applications that we talked about and other activities where you see reconciliation processes run amok, which essentially is we're verifying data in a very manual way, that starts to go onto the endangered species list, right? We no longer have to do that because blockchain provides a way to cleanse that data and verify that data as it's being written into the one source of truth. Versus today's systems, as you know, it's a bit all over the place. It's a bit of mess. We have all these data projects to clean up our data, or we don't have the right data, or someone fat fingered the data, etc. And so I agree with you. Blockchain, one, should most certainly be one of those technologies that no one needs to know anything about it. It should be a back end technology that the tech people get it and understand it, and the public sees a sovereign data store that's algorithmically encrypted to protect them, their privacy. They can revoke access rights of their medical records, their whatever records, what have you. But it's a back end technology that, again, we shouldn't be over advertising. I think that's part of the big issue is whether it be crypto or just saying blockchain is going to solve all of our problems. Those two factors, I think, have really limited the adoption of blockchain, in my opinion, at least.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, well said. Well said. Good explanation there. Good technical explanation too,
Right?
for your technical audience.
Yeah.
I love it.
So talking about so we went through some of these key technologies. So we talked about digitization, we talked about AI, IoT. We talked about the smart grids, etc. Now, what about things like you hear about digital twins? What do you think about digital twins? Because you see, a digital twin of a citizen, a digital
Hmm.
twin of a building, a digital twin of the overall city, like Singapore. They've got this strong aspiration of creating an entire digital twin of the entire city itself
Hmm.
and everything
Hmm.
that moves within it. What do you think about that? Is that kind of rainbows and unicorns, fairy tale stuff, or do you think that there's real legitimate use cases there here in the near term?
Real use cases, real uses. Another topic that I've written extensively on and I teach in the US and Europe on this topic. Digital twins, basically, it's creating a digital version, a digital replica of a physical thing. It's used in many, many contexts. Very much you see it in the industrial world. And by the way, again, another great example of convergence. The industrial IoT, is a big user of digital twins. General Electric has, for example, thousands and thousands of digital twins of their machines all over the world. Um, you gave the example of Singapore. Singapore has actually built. It's a 70x million dollar functioning digital twin of the city state of Singapore, and they can do things like understand energy use. They can understand things like traffic circumstances. They can also simulate things like disasters, like flooding or a chemical spill or an unfortunate explosion. They can do things like that. And so you're starting to see cities around the world use digital twins, not necessarily replicas in that level of detail of an entire city, but of city blocks. So
Right.
you're seeing for example, the construction industry really loves digital twins because you can do things like understand the shadows. Again, you might not think of that, but when you throw up a new high rise, what will be the effects of shadows in a community? And knowing that before you build anything means you can make design changes. You can do things like simulate airflow. The grid system that we have here in the U.S., just by its nature, has a wind phenomena. Depending on the heat and the direction and speed of air, and that has consequences. If you ever, that's why I guess Chicago is the windy city, right?
Right. Right.
um, New York City, actually, one of the motivations for the grid system was that, in a time of plague, and disease, if the air could flow easily, they thought that would actually help with lowering the incidence of contagion, of people catching things, contrary to what people might think about its origin. Um, so, so where were we? What were we talking about? We were talking about
Digital twins,
the
and
digital twins. Yes.
the realistic, because I agree with you. I mean, I think, just like a lot of these technologies, when we try to be too grandiose, it's just kind of like the traditional, Big Bang theory on projects. They never work out because they're just too big, too complicated. And so I think what you were articulating, which I think is spot on, is kind of the modularization of digital twins and applying it to and my team at Microsoft, we're doing a lot of work in this space, and we
Hmm.
actually deliberately moved off of focusing on cities to focus more on buildings, because
Yes.
you can control the parameters much better there. And oftentimes, you're working with a construction company, and they can embed that into their existing processes. And I think you mentioned two key components of the three-legged stool. You had mentioned you can observe a digital twin digitally. You can simulate that, but also you can start to create new designs and new scenarios in a virtual environment. And where the industry 4.0 folks, the GEs of the world, having a jet engine completely fabricated as a digital twin, what it means is there's very little upfront investment that I have to make to build something that could be a multi-million-dollar engine as a test, right? Same thing with buildings or infrastructure. What happens if we remove that traffic light in that intersection? What are the cascading results that will happen as a result? And so it gives us a really good not only simulation environment, but a design time environment that we can tweak, adjust, etc. And you see this just take off all over the place. And when we
Hmm.
talk about that convergence, I think you nailed it earlier when you talked about this, because another thing that I see bundled with digital twins is the AR, VR, MR world. So augmented reality, virtual reality, or most sophisticated, the mixed reality, where you actually have IoT sensors in the environment interacting with the virtual environment. And so, whether it's GE, where they've got a jet engine and where they see essentially what looks like a hologram, but it's augmented reality. Or if you're Ford and they have through NVIDIA, they've got the what they call their virtual holodeck, where you can have engineers from around the globe in a virtual environment with their Oculus headsets on and
Right.
pull a tire out and see all the corresponding pieces, and they can adjust and tweak and design, and it's super cool stuff. And to be able to do that at in a city, I would have to imagine is super super beneficial.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, great examples. And I wanted to share, I have it written down here because I didn't want to mess up the name. But there's a new capital of a Indian state that's been built. It's called Amaravati. I
Mm,
hope I said that right, Amaravati. And that is being built first as a digital twin. So as you know, with digital twins, you've got the sort of the design, the construction, and then the sort of operations. So you've got kind of these three phases.
right,
Um, and so with cities now, the most incredible opportunity is to be able to build the city first as a digital city,
yep,
like in the true meaning of entirely digital, and emulate scenarios, simulate all sort of traffic. Throw in drones. You know, throw in trash collection or different mechanisms for dealing with trash management. And now you can, to the best of our ability, optimize before you build.
right.
And I think it'll be very exciting to see what happens in that Indian city when they go from the digital twin to the physical twin.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. It'll be a real testament to see how useful that really is, and where we need to tweak and where we don't need to tweak. But I think if you look at folks at Siemens or GE, at least on a small scale, they've been able to pull this off. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to do it in these larger scales. Now, that's one technology I want to ask you about. Another technology, just to get your thoughts on. We didn't go over this prior, so for people listening or watching, this isn't all contrived here. But what are your thoughts around quantum computing?
Mm.
And it's is this thing real? You think it's going to be useful for cities? Obviously we've got a physics problem. We've got to solve this on a larger scale, right? No one's got general purpose quantum computing as a service, and probably most cities won't buy a quantum computer and store it somewhere. They'll rely on some provider. But in general, where do you see the application of technology?
Hmm.
Is it legitimate for cities?
Well, I'm pretty excited and bullish about quantum computing. Again, I just I'm privileged enough to write about it and teach it a little bit, mostly directed at a business audience rather than a science or physics audience. And uh, it's early in terms of the accessibility, the ease of accessibility and applications today. It's not a new science. We've been working on this for a few decades already, but we are hitting some breakthroughs in terms of stability, the coherence
Mm-hmm.
of the processing. Um, we are able to process more with adding additional qubits, right? These are the units of processing rather than just an, traditional classical bits. So as a broader space, let's cities aside for a second, I find this to be really compelling. Now, I understand where we're at today. Quantum as a information processor is very good at certain things. It's not nearly as ubiquitous as classical computing, the very laptops and smartphones we use today, which are remarkably multifunctional. We can do lots of things. Quantum computing is great at optimization and mathematics, certain types of mathematics. Um, uh, but there are nice little hints that it could become a broader type of computing. Now, let's kind of play with this a little bit and make some assumptions. Let's assume we do have these breakthroughs in the next 10 years. We get plenty of qubits. It becomes stable. It's replicable. We have very good error checking, the kinds of things we still need to achieve. And I agree with you. I don't see people buying quantum computers. I think it's going to be a very, very solidly cloud-based service. Um, in most applications, there will
Right.
certainly be times when you need to have the quantum computing with us, physically.
Maybe the
Um,
CIA will have their own quantum
they
computer,
right,
right?
universities, yeah. There may be some scenarios, but if we're going to make it widely available, I think it becomes a cloud service.
Yeah.
And uh, the ability for it to process at speeds that are basically unfathomable right now, thousands of times, ultimately maybe millions of times faster than today, will make today's computing look pretty slow.
Hmm.
And you, and so that's mind opening. What would you do with a computer right now if it was 5,000 times faster?
Right.
It's just very hard to conceive of. But we'll have lots of things and lots of problems we'll solve and lots of great advantages to that. Okay, so that's the broader context. I am strongly bullish about it. I do think it's going to happen. There are many, many people who don't. Many people are on the fence. They don't know. I've spoken to people who believe it won't happen. To the
Really?
extent that we think. So there's plenty of debate by very, very smart people on all sides of this. I'm making my bet that this is going to happen. It means potentially we have to replace a whole stack of computing around the world.
Yeah.
One gentleman, one leader of a quantum group at a very big tech company, whose name I won't say, suggests that basically the entire stack of computing around the world, over the next few decades will have to be replaced. It's trillions and trillions of dollars of replacement. So the opportunities is going to be really enormous. So you asked me about quantum in cities. It's really, really early for a question like that, considering we're still trying to digitize, classical computing, some of our, basic analog services. Um, Again, you could find it in the form of, again, a sort of optimization service provided through Azure or through Google or even Oracle and others who will eventually provide it, where you're optimizing for traffic management. Maybe you're using it to help with investigations on the public safety side. Um, Certainly, we would see it maybe in municipal power in the energy sector.
Right.
Um, uh, but I think it's early and light. I don't see it any. I in my own research, I can't think right now of a city that's using it. Although somebody might write in the comments that you should look at this, which would be great. Um, but I definitely see some growing usage in the private sector very rapidly.
So
Um,
so
yeah.
let's pause there for a second because I think it's also important to talk about the notion of quantum simulation or quantum annealing, the
Hmm.
more technical term for it. Which, for those that are not familiar with it, it's essentially the practice of using algorithms that simulate that you're using a quantum computer, but you're using classical hardware. And so, I think there are really good examples of those sorts of situations that are being used. Do you think that that's a good segue, and cities should invest in more of kind of like the D wave oriented type of solutions where, or even Microsoft's got quantum annealing services you can and Q sharp and do some really cool stuff. But do you
Yeah.
think that's a good stepping stone or a good option for cities to consider?
To answer the question, I would need to start with the problem that was trying to be solved, right? So,
Yep.
what problem does a city have today that it would need annealing quantum computer? I think it's too early. My advice to cities would be learn. You start learning about it. Certainly, if you have an innovation lab or an innovation team, um, by all means, do some experimentation. But maybe I'm being a little bit conservative. I don't see a very near term application in an urban context. The one I was thinking about, though, that came to me as I concluded my comments, was the notion of a quantum internet, because obviously the urban infrastructure is where our we have all the connectivity. We have millions and millions of miles of fiber and copper underneath our streets. A lot of it is hanging up on the poles too, and then there are, you know, the different access points that a city has to manage or at least provide power to, and have some sort of regulatory oversight in terms of distributing information. Uh, if we get to a point of beginning to implement a quantum internet, and the U.S. government just signed off on a major quantum internet project here in the last 10 days,
Yep.
cities will be engaged. And by the way, what I mean by the quantum internet basically is moving these qubits across wires or wireless, such that if anyone tries to interfere with them, it stops. It can detect and stop the transmission, so it's almost entirely secure. Hopefully that made sense.
Yep.
Also exceptionally fast. And I'm in terms of also the processing of information across that network. So it's a super secure, if not almost. People would say in order to break a quantum internet, you would have to defy physics. Therefore, it is not breakable. But if you're
And
if
at the
you're in
same
cybersecurity, famous last words, right?
right, right. And at the same time, because I remember this from a long, long time ago. You also, the speed will be determined based on how far away you want this to travel, because you have to deal with speed of light issues. I remember I was working on a project for a bank once upon a time, and we were looking at real time replication of all of our systems. And as a disaster recovery thing, we wanted to make sure that it was far enough away. So if there was a natural disaster, or a hurricane, or an earthquake, or whatever, that
Hmm.
the data center, the remote data center, was at least a state away. And what we found was the further out you went, the more latency. Even though we were laying dark fiber, we were good there. But unfortunately, we were fighting physics at that point, because it can only go so fast.
That's right.
But that's a different problem.
As far as we know, that's right.
Right, right. So lots of really cool technologies. The last one that I want to ask you about, I think this is probably a no-brainer. But we didn't talk about communications technologies.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, next generation Wi-Fi, 5G. What are your thoughts there?
I'm intimately aware of this space. When I was working at the city of Palo Alto, this is something of great interest to the community. Faster internet access, more competition, lower prices. It's, we don't have to talk about the benefits clearly of connecting people and systems. I think we all can assume that's a good thing. But what we do see in our cities today, unfortunately, is we don't have high-speed internet available to everybody.
Right,
I'm not talking about the developing world. I'm talking about the developed world.
right.
A city like San Jose here in Silicon Valley in California, it's a city of a little over 1 million people. There are thousands of homes, people either who still have dial-up, or are having difficulty even getting a connection, or can't afford a connection. There's a
Yep.
multitude of reasons.
Well, I had
Um,
a guest on a few episodes back. He is the CIO for the city of Dublin, and what
mm,
he was talking about when we were talking about the digital divide was diversity and inclusion, and that what we'll find is that minorities are at a significant disadvantage because they don't have the connectivity.
mhm.
So I think it's there's very real consequences, to your point,
Yeah,
of not having that ubiquity.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean it is potentially you're in the area of human rights here.
Right.
That you know that people who, for one reason or another, can't or are prohibited from accessing information, it becomes a significant human issue. In the world today, we still have a long way to go rolling out internet to our communities. We're only at about 58% of the world is connected to the internet. That's moving actually quite nice now, quite fast. It's picked up momentum recently, but we're still a ways away from getting everybody connected. And if you're not connected, you're not getting all the advantages we get. And that can range, by the way, from just being empowered with knowledge through to getting better healthcare and better education. Some basic human rights. And so the project to sort of connect the world is still ongoing. Now, in the developed world, we're several generations into this, and here in the U.S., a lot of us have access now to the fourth generation cellular 4G, and we're starting to see that the fifth generation, much higher speed and reliability in wireless networks is beginning to be deployed. We saw a very successful launch in Jacksonville in Florida, and in Sacramento in California. And so you see Dubai, again, quite a common city that pops up with when we talk about urban innovation. And Italy, there's a couple of cities that have got some widespread 5G now. As a technologist, often the role is to provide capability, to provide platforms, provide capability, and then other people will work out, how they'll use it, and they'll come up with incredible inventions. There's no doubt that whilst there's some obvious benefits to having faster internet, when you have blazingly fast, reliable internet and everything can be connected, which is the case with 5G, the applications will become apparent to us in the years ahead. It's hard to anticipate right now, but imagine a world in which everything is connected. You can address everything. You can see the status of everything. We will see phenomenal innovation around that.
Right.
Now, there's other types of wireless, as you raise, in an urban environment. You've got short, length connectivity. Like Bluetooth, we use that on our phones and different devices. We've got Wi-Fi, which is quite ubiquitous and quite popular. We have faster, more reliable forms of Wi-Fi coming on board. And then you got things like, for example, when you connect a IoT device to a light, what amount of information is processed at the point of receiving that information? Do you do the computation at the edge, or do you send lots of information back into the cloud? And based on that calculus, you can have different types of communication. If you're just sending a very small amount of information, it can be a different type of wireless tech, and it can be low cost, ultimately close to free, and fast. But if you need to send, high multimedia, rich content, or rich media, I think they call it now. Multimedia, I'm showing my age, I think. You need maybe fiber, right? As a connection. So you're going to make your decision in a city environment on communications based on application, of course. The environment, is it indoors? It is outdoors? What distances is it at? How reliable? What bandwidth do you need? And so that's what we're doing.
How many devices are being connected, right?
Yeah.
All those factors, yeah.
Totally. And we've Zigbee, LoRa, NB-IoT, just listing a few, Sigfox, Wi-Sun, 5G. These are all different types of wireless technology that are finding sort of a niche. Right. And no doubt, you cannot think of the future of cities without thinking about telecommunications. This is such a core. And that goes back to your point very early in our conversation about, for example, IoT being fundamental. even more fundamental is the digital infrastructure of a city, and
Yeah.
that's enabled by your telecommunications.
Yeah, totally. Um, Now, so we've covered a lot of ground with the technology. And so if you're listening, you're probably like, okay, this is great. A lot there, a lot to think about. Uh, what would be some, maybe three or four practical piece of advice for those folks that are in a position of they're not the leaders. I mean, they've got this thing licked. They don't need the help. It's the folks that are maybe struggling with this to sell the city leaders, or even where to get started. What practical advice would you have for folks that are looking at this emerging tech and want to build that digital fabric for their city? What would be some key pointers?
Yeah, when I look at sort of the world of cities, and there are hundreds of thousands of cities in the world. There's 19,000 cities here in the U.S. alone, and then you look at and you try to say, well, who's got a documented, approved smart city strategy, or if they don't have that, who is actually doing innovative things using tech? The group of cohorts is pretty small still. So to your question, the opportunity in my mind is still ahead, and that's one of the reasons. That was a great reason why I wrote the book, is I wanted to give the playbook, basically the guide on how to do this for the cities that don't know how to do it, don't know where to start. And it sort of it describes that in extensive detail. The first step is to have a vision, right? Whether it's the city manager or the mayor or some other sort of leader who is initiating it, has to articulate a vision of what they want that community to be. And that vision then gets massaged and developed over time, working with a lot of different stakeholders. Vision is very tightly then coupled with leadership. And so we have to have the leaders step up. And if you have a community, and the city manager and the mayor, just picking those two as their well understood leaders,
Right.
they're not interested in this. This is going to be difficult in moving forward. You gotta, if you're a person who wants this to happen in your community and you're not seeing it, these are some of the folks you're going to have to build a case and persuade and show the benefits. So I do think you've got a vision, you've got to have leadership. That's what's happening today. You're starting to see a new generation of government leaders who do understand the role of technology. They understand that we're only going to solve the problems of the future if we think differently and we think bolder, and we're prepared to take risks. So the momentum is in favor of that. We're not trending away from it; we're trending towards it.
Right.
So vision, leadership. The next thing, and that kind of, both of those sort of drive the next point, which is what are the goals? Like what are the actual tangible goals? Is it to enable high-speed internet to every house? Is it to ensure that water doesn't leak when it goes from the source to the home? Is it to reduce traffic accidents, as in California we have Vision Zero, for example. I think other states do too, where we're trying to reduce or eliminate all traffic accidents. These are important things to discuss and agree on. Every community has limitations in time and in money and talent. And so you have to be really super prioritized.
Right.
So focusing on those goals. I'm not yet convinced that buying a smart city platform is the right path yet. I'm going to be reserved and sort of going to reserve judgment on that. A lot of vendors would like to sell a city a, in quotes, platform, but maybe the approach could be to solve these very important big issues in a different way. Like digitalization or an IoT sensor network for helping to reduce bicycle accidents.
Right.
So, pick those goals. Some low hanging fruit, I do think, and I said this at the very beginning, is digitalization. A city, I mean, if you want to make progress and show, what you're capable of, the city itself can rapidly transform some tedious basic processes to a set of forms on a website or an app. I say do that. Inventorize all your processes and then choose the ones that are easy, work on the harder ones later. Something like permitting. Everybody at some point in their life probably touches permitting,
Right.
whether they're putting in a new kitchen or something, and make that digital. Make that a seamless experience for your community. Um, the I guess the last point, because honestly, this is such a huge question. I could list a lot of things. I'm old. It's all in the book, of course. Would be to find ways to collaborate.
Hmm.
Right. So cities cannot do this alone. We're no longer in a position, and we haven't been this way for decades, that you can say, "Oh, I'll just no worries. The city's going to take care of it." That world doesn't really exist anymore. If we're going to get things done, we're going to have amazing collaboration, amazing partnerships. And we call them public-private partnerships. It's a mix of the city, with community, with vendors, with academia, with federal. There's just ways to intertwine and do things together to do. So as you embark on this smart city strategy, and then you're looking at goals, and then you're working on how to execute, figure out how to pull people in and tap resources and collaborate in meaningful and unique ways. One of the tangible ways you can do this is by making the data of the city more accessible. This notion of opening up the data of communities. Um, City data is generally available anyway through public records requests. In many countries, this is law. This is codified.
Right.
So all you're doing is making it easier and actually encouraging others to use that data to develop solutions, bring better data-driven decision making to debates and discussions. Fortunately, this is one of the areas of urban innovation that has moved forward pretty well around the world. Many cities have an open data portal, an open data platform, but many don't yet. And so that would be an area that can help to foster these public-private partnerships.
Nice. So, what I heard you say was one, have a vision for what your city wants to be when it grows up. Two, have some tangible, actionable goals around what you want to achieve so that you can have those conversations with the city leaders and you can be very tangible, and you take that vision, you take that strategy, and you focus that energy on the right investments, most importantly, at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you're absolutely right, and I also like some of those end comments you've made around kind of that digital platform and how that is so important for kind of having the foundational basis for everything going forward. And a component of that, as you mentioned, is data. And that's a great place to start, is clean the data. And one of the technologies that you and I have been talking about here is, blockchain is a great technology to help master some of that data. Now, before we close out, what I'd like to do is kind of go into kind of a lightning round here with you, Jonathan. Again, we didn't
Sure.
prepare for this, so
Uh-oh.
it's going to be, we're going to have to be on our toes. It's got to be on our A game, Jonathan. So in different time horizons, right now, so from now to 1 year, from 1 year to 3 years, and from 3 years onwards, tell me the technologies that we should be focusing on each horizon now, near term, and long term. What do you think?
Mm. Great question. So let's do this. Let me see if I can do this briefly. Not a lot happens in a city in 1 year, by the way. So um, uh, the time horizons, I think, in a city context have to be a little longer. But I
Yeah,
appreciate the spirit of the question, kind of
yeah.
near, medium, and long term.
Yeah.
Um, the so a bit repetitive, but important to summarize. In the way in which you asked the question, cities need to put a real focus on data. What data do they have? Is the data governed? Are they leveraging the value of data? That's something they should do straight away. That should be a project. That should be a place where they're applying talent. Cities have a lot of data, and there's a lot of insight in there. So I would say in the short term, there's a super focus on data. Um, Moving forward a little bit, digitalization, have a strategy around moving as many processes as possible online into apps and onto watches, and supporting touchless interfaces as we kind of enter a post-pandemic world where there'll be more of that. That's sort of in the sort of, again, current into the next few years. Upgrades, there's a lot of old infrastructure, a lot of legacy systems. And by the way, I would be, and people know this, I'm a very big advocate of cloud computing. So, where cities have traditionally had their own data centers with their applications on site, still do today. As you kind of look out to your smart city strategy, it's time to rethink that. And you can acquire and deploy solutions much more rapidly using operating expenses rather than capital expenses by pursuing a cloud computing strategy. So that would be there in the sort of in the next few years time horizon. Onto that, again, this is based on investment available and opportunity and size, scale of city, would be IoT, making sure you have a sense of what the advantages are there for your community. Is it about safety? Is it about quality of air, transportation, trash collection, whatever it is that you are thinking, IoT might play a role there.
Right.
Heading out a little bit further, I think we can think about energy. Do you have a strategy for consuming and maybe even producing more solar and wind, hydro, if it makes sense? What is your mix and what are your goals relative to oil and gas based energy and coal in some instances? So that, and related to that, as we talked about in this conversation today, smart grid, does an implementation of smart grid make sense? So maybe we're now into the 3 to 5 year time horizon. Somewhere around there, the drones will be showing up in the environment. Do you have the regulation to support drones? What support do the drone companies need from the city? Not long after that is autonomous vehicles are going to change the landscape. Autonomous vehicles are going to force cities to design differently, give them opportunities to design differently. As we sort of head into the sort of 10-year time horizon, big projects around the climate crisis need to be underway. I say this because 1.5 billion people live on coastlines, and they live mainly in coastlines in cities. Those 1.5 billion people are going to see an increased incidence of flooding, and but it's not just about people living on coastlines. If there's storms, the storms will be worse. If there's droughts, the droughts will be worse, and we have to mitigate and accommodate those changes. Some of them are irreversible. So you got to think about what those big major plans are. As we go out further than sort of 15 years, I think there are new forms of housing. I think there are new work styles. I think there's a lot more in the space of things like urban forests. I do see a potential for us to be converting large spaces in our cities to parks and forests. Can you imagine a main thoroughfare in a city that rather than having an 8-lane highway of roads going either way, now you have a meadow, you have grass with a stream going down the middle, and you have retail on both sides and outdoor spaces for kids and families. That's a future that is very, very accessible and I think increasingly attractive. 20, 30 years, whoa, all bets are off. Who knows?
Right.
Certainly, artificial general intelligence will probably be playing a part. Quantum will be here. We'll have a whole new set of opportunities for humanity. Plus, I think a whole set of really tough challenges to address. I mean, 30 years from today is like the last 200 years, right? So that's mind blowing to think that far ahead.
No, it totally is, and I wanted us to take some time and really put these technologies into context, because it's easy for us to kind of say, oh, well, here's the laundry list of technologies, but plotting it on on a set of time horizons kind of gives people the idea of, okay, so when do I really need to start taking these technologies seriously, but also what technology do I focus on first versus what do I put on the watch list. So I think that was really awesome list. I agree with everything that you said. I think the super realistic, and like you said, I would actually move back from even 30 years. I'd actually put the marker at the 15 years and say anything past that, especially in cities, is you're getting into rainbows and unicorn land. A lot can happen between now and then. So let's not try to pontificate around what that would look like. But it definitely gives people an idea and a sense of at least what we know now, kind of where these things set. So listen, Jonathan, as always, it's great talking to you. You've got phenomenal insights. Your book is out. Anything you want to say about your book? Where can they get it? How can they get it? All that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I echo your comments there, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you and to spend this long time actually getting into some substance, which is often not possible on a 15 or 20-minute podcast. But we've spent some nice time here chatting. Yeah, the book is. I'm very, very pleased. It was basically came out in July, as I think you know, and just got my sales figures, and they're incredible. People are buying the book all over the world, and so that's a good sign. And people are really passionate about the future of the cities. They're passionate about their future, which is what the book is really about. Amazon is clearly a place you can buy it, but Amazon's not available everywhere. You can get it like in Europe in Waterstones, and in Australia and Bookatopia, um, and Barnes and Noble and other places. And so I would just love for people to check it out, and they can definitely find it. If anyone would like a signed copy from me, I'm happy to do that too. I'm doing quite a few of those each day today. These days, I'm doing a few signed copies and sending out it per day. So just reach out to me, through Twitter or LinkedIn, um, and I will arrange that with you. So that's an option some people like as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I've been able to take a look at the book, and yeah, it's top notch. I recommend everyone, if this is a space of, even if it's just interest, fascinating insights, very very practical. It's not just for dummies; it's for everybody.
Yeah,
But yeah, great job on that. And listen, Jonathan, you've always got an invite to come back. I hope to have you back and talk more smart city stuff.
would love to. Love to. It's a pleasure.
All
Thank you.
right. Till the next time. Bye now.